So thank you so much for hosting us here. We're very excited to be with you. Welcome to this conversation about something we're calling footprint evaluation, which is about how to embed consideration of environmental sustainability into all evaluations. So we're going to start by introducing ourselves. Andy?
Thank you. Can you just nod if the audio is okay?
Yeah, that's good. And we need the next slide, please. Whoever's controlling the slides.
I'm Andy Rowe. This is a winter shot of our farm on the northwest of Canada on Vancouver Island. Our farm is on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish Nation. And we in this farm and myself remain committed to their independence and self-government. Jane.
Great, thanks Andy. My name's Jane Davidson. I'm also beaming in from the North American Pacific Northwest. I'm just a few kilometers south of Andy in Seattle, Washington. The traditional custodians of the land here are the Duwamish people of the Coast Salish tribes. I'm originally from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and mostly lived recently in Auckland, which is on the traditional lands of the Ngāti Whātua people. So kia ora from us. I also wanted to introduce, sorry, on the next, we got to flip forward a couple of slides. Sorry, we're having a remote slide control. So that's Seattle. And then the next slide, please. Thank you. So Patricia Rogers, Dugan Fraser, Andy and I formed Footprint Evaluation in 2020 to try and help evaluators become sustainability ready. That is to incorporate sustainability into all evaluations. Next part of the slide, please. We've been joined by a wonderful group of thought partners who have been helping us think through the issues and what is most needed. Our focus is on evaluation practitioners, those who undertake, commission, and use evaluations. So we're working to provide practical guidance and tools that evaluators can apply in a wide range of settings without needing a lot of training. So next slide, please. There are several other movements out there working on a similar or overlapping agenda. You may have heard of some of them. Our work complements theirs, and we quite often collaborate with these people as well. Next slide. So here's the plan for today. First, we're going to run through a few key concepts around sustainability. Then we're going to dive into 3 practical ways to get sustainability onto the agenda and infused into evaluation. And then finally, we have a few useful resources that we can point you to and an invitation to join the footprint evaluation movement. So I'm going to switch over to Andy now. He's going to talk about what we mean by sustainability and how we should be thinking about assessing it.
Thank you, Jane. The normal way of presenting the Sustainable Development Goals is on the, I guess it'd be the right side of that slide. So they're all just together in numerical order. A number of organizations have a different perspective which we embrace and engage with. It's called the wedding cake example. Swedes named it as the wedding cake. And everything, the production and consumption SDGs and the well-being SDGs rest and depend on the strength and the quality of the natural resource base and success on those SDGs. Now, sustainability is an intergenerational concept. We're very concerned about the planet that we're leaving for our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren, and for all the other species and non-human things that exist on this planet. So evaluation has a role to play. The SDGs are obviously front and center of what we do globally, but evaluation has an important role. Can I have the next slide, please? And in order to address that role, we need to be able to say, well, how are we doing? What is the effects of this intervention on the on sustainability. Could I have the next part of this slide? So here's a topology that has been developed and applied that frames how we look at our contributions. Could I go to the next slide? And as you can see, the bottom part of that topology is destruction. We continue to destroy natural systems. The right-hand side is where we need to be, where it's restoring systems. And in this, the data for the figure you have before you comes from a recent evaluation by the International Fund of Agricultural Development that I was part of. And 70% of country projects that we considered with case studies are actually harming the natural system. And this is not unusual. Most of what we do harms the natural system. The good news is that 30% are neutral or actually contributing somewhat to that. So what we're doing now is we're developing rubrics to enable the application of this typology to all evaluations, especially those which do not have specific natural system outcomes, and especially those that are less well resourced, or less than $1 million, less than $100,000 in budget. And I think it's important to be optimistic these days. So while IFAD is currently 70% of their projects are harming natural systems, there's an excellent example of a restorative project in Northeast Brazil. It's called Planting Climate Resilience in Rural Communities of the Northeast. The acronym is PCRP. It's easy to find on the internet. The Northeast is basically the poorest region. It's a semi-arid region under severe drought and getting drier and drier. Only 24% of wells in the region have fresh water. The rest are saline or brackish and unfit for human consumption and cannot be used for agriculture. This project is funded by the IFAD, the Green Climate Fund, by the government of Brazil, and BNDES Bank. And it is an excellent example of the type of intervention we need, which is restoring the aquifers, restoring by doing planting of indigenous species that are better retaining water, and that retained water is available for human consumption and for use by the natural systems. It's a flagship project in our minds, and is a good example of the type of restorative stuff that will take us over to the right-hand side of that typology. Next slide, please. Well, why are we in this position where most projects are harming natural systems? And really, it has to do with our worldviews and mindsets. And the worldviews and mindsets for sustainability ready evaluation are different from that concept that talks about natural resources, which means the resources are available for human consumption. It's a different mindset. And we need to understand where that older mindset, where natural systems were viewed as natural resources come from. It comes from the concept of dominion. That concept of dominion is also the concept that underlies colonialism. That the occupation of by Western Europe of territories of other people, and the failure to recognize that there is a need that these people have rights, that these people are there, the same that these natural systems have value and are important and are essential to the existence of humans. And following from that is the mindset of trade-offs, that we can either have natural systems or economic development, that we can have equity or we can have sustainability. In actual fact, the mindset we need, the worldview we need, is one that values natural systems, and the mindset we need is seeking the win-win solutions that benefit both natural systems and human systems. Can I go to the next slide? Once we take that worldview, that human systems and natural systems are intensely coupled, and that we need both, and that we rely on natural systems, and that evaluation has important contributions to make in assessing how we're doing in terms of our impacts and our contributions to natural systems, then we need to modify our evaluation function. In particular, we need to recognize that a typical development project is about 5 to 7 years in duration. So the projects that are underway now and that are starting now will not have evaluations until around 2030, because evaluation, there's normally a midterm evaluation, and then there's an end of project, end of program evaluation that follows a few years after. And so those end of term evaluations are going to occur in 2030, which is the year when important thresholds are going to be reached. Thresholds in terms of climate and thresholds in terms of biodiversity and sustainability. And the importance of those thresholds is we can't go backwards. Those thresholds are tipping points from which we can't recover. So if evaluation is going to contribute, it needs to move up from reporting 2030 and afterwards, and begin providing our feedback and assessments much earlier. So we need to adjust the evaluation function, integrating evaluation more closely with operations, with adaptive management, encouraging adaptive management, providing information for the management of interventions that are underway now. And to do this, if I could have the final slide of my section. Can I go on to the next slide, please? We need to, in footprint evaluation, our theory of change is awareness and knowledge of climate change, of sustainability is rapidly changing and rapidly improving. Our job is not to bully people or to try and pressure them into becoming more sustainability aware and contributing sustainability in their work. Our job is to provide the guidance and tools and methods that evaluators will need as they become more aware, that commissioners will need in commissioning that. So our job is really to help them forward and provide the resources that they'll need to become more sustainability ready in the evaluations they're undertaking. And that is what footprint is evaluation is attempting to do. Jane?
Great, thanks, Andy. So on to the next slide. We're going to switch gears now and think about how we get environmental considerations onto the agenda for evaluation, particularly in cases where there is no explicit environmental component to what we're evaluating. Next slide. We need to think of this from two angles, the demand side and the supply side. There are things that commissioning organizations can do to build sustainability into the terms of reference for evaluation, and there are things that evaluators can do even if the terms of reference don't include any mention of sustainability. So on the next slide, we want to share a few tips for First up, making a compelling argument for getting sustainability into evaluation. We have a few ideas there. Secondly, for those of you who work with the OECD DAC criteria, we have some ideas about how environmental sustainability can be embedded into them, and in fact already is. We just have to make it happen. And then finally, we have a set of sustainability ready and equity ready key evaluation questions that dovetail well with the DAC criteria and help us take them to the next level. So on the next slide, please. So option one around making the argument for inclusion of sustainability concerns. As we all know in 2022, and I know this is just as true in Brazil as it is here in the United States, actually arguing with people makes them dig their heels in. So we need to be sure to invite them to the conversation and make it productive. Next slide, please. Most evaluations of environmental programs don't look at the human system at all, and most evaluations of human system change efforts don't consider the natural system. We can just click to the next few elements on the slide, please, 3 more. What we need is for decision makers to be cognizant of both systems in every decision they make. Our role as evaluators is to help decision makers to do that. So next slide, please, and you can click the words. Another strong argument is this. So in evaluation, we all know that we should look for unintended effects as well as intended ones, right? But environmental initiatives are the ones that affect the natural system on purpose. Every other initiative, policy, or program that we evaluate affects the environment accidentally. So at this point in our planet's near destruction, which Andy calls the end game, every single move counts. We must help our clients be aware of the effects of their decisions and their actions, whether those effects are intentional or not. Now that can involve a pretty serious mind shift, as we've already discussed. So the next slide, another compelling way to make the argument is to speak to the nexus, which is showing how environmental sustainability and social justice are inextricably linked. So I believe we'll be making a copy of these slides available. So those are a few arguments that you can use to make this case. On the next slide, another useful thing that you can point to is the various international agreements that Brazil has already committed to. So this, even if you don't have environmental objectives for a particular thing that you're evaluating, you can still point to these agreements and say, well, our country has committed to these, therefore we need to be reflecting those values in the way that we do the evaluation. Okay, next slide, please. We're going to move on to using the OECD DAC criteria. Now, 5 of the 6 OECD DAC evaluation criteria lend themselves particularly well to infusing sustainability. If your project has environmental objectives, you could also include effectiveness as one of the DAC criteria, but our main focus here is on the evaluation of non-environmental initiatives. So we focused on the other criteria where we feel we can really get some traction. So I'm going to move through these one by one. So the first one is the relevance criterion. Next slide, please. So the relevance criterion is all about doing the right things. With respect to the natural system, that means that the initiative equitably addresses the most important issues in both human and natural systems. It recognizes the accumulated harm that we've done to the natural system that threatens all life, and that restoration of the natural system function is a global responsibility. That means preventing damage to, at a minimum, and usually restoring the natural system is what we need. And finally, it addresses any systemic or structural issues that have been causing environmental damage, especially in areas where human well-being and or social justice are impacted and where natural functions are severely threatened. Next slide, please. Coherence is a newer criterion in the OECD DAC framework, one which might not be in other systems. It refers to the alignment of an intervention with existing policies or programs. For this criterion, we can do what we mentioned before, which is identifying international commitments and treaties that are in place, government-wide policies and organizational policies and commitments related to sustainability. So we can point to those as part of the coherence criterion.
Mariana, se esse processo chegar aqui, ainda vai fazer essa CRD-LID.
Sorry, do we have a question?
Sorry, Jane, some interference.
Okay, sure.
Go ahead.
All right, so on the efficiency criterion, so efficiency needs to consider how sustainably and equitably our natural systems are being used, protected, and restored. As Andy said, we should try to avoid the use of the term natural resources, which is something that the OECD DAC criteria does use this terminology, but this implies that natural systems exist mainly for the benefit of humans, and we need to approach this much more responsibly. Okay, on the next slide regarding impact, the OECD DAC criterion of effectiveness only looks at whether or not the stated objectives have been met, which might not include any environmental outcomes. But the criterion of impact is bigger. It includes all impacts, intended and unintended results, positive and negative, direct and indirect. And the OECD DAC material explicitly refers to environmental impacts if you look at their guidance. Oops. So now, finally, for the sustainability criterion, ironically, this next slide, please. Oh, sorry, and the next one after that, it was impact. Thank you. So ironically, this OECD DAC criterion of sustainability tends not to focus on environmental sustainability at all, but rather on how long the outcomes and impacts last. However, a truly lasting and durable solution is one that is environmentally sustainable as well. So we need to ask questions like, how resilient and well sustained are the benefits in the face of emerging environmental changes? So next slide. In summary, even when the goals and objectives don't specifically mention environmental sustainability, the OECD DAC criteria can provide an entry point to ensure that it is included in the scope of your evaluation. Okay, the next slide, please. We're going to option 3. Here's another option for getting environmental issues onto the evaluation agenda, and that is building them into the key evaluation questions that guide your whole evaluation. Andy and I developed this set of sustainability-ready key evaluation questions that I had been using along with my colleague Tomás Chianca from Brazil and many of our workshops, and also in some of the things that we've written. So these have now been adapted to infuse both sustainability and equity. So let us just give you a quick sample on the next slide. So piece of terminology, the evaluand is whatever is being evaluated. So we're wanting to ask in this question around outcomes and impacts. You want to know how good, valuable, and important are the outcomes and impacts. And so up at the top 2 paragraphs, we have a quick explanation of what do we include when we're looking at outcomes and impacts. And these things explicitly lay out that we're looking at impacts on not just humans, but also on the natural environment. And you can see the elements of both equity and sustainability built into there. In the bottom 3 paragraphs, you can see 3 sub-questions that would help you unpack that key evaluation question, asking, you know, how substantially did the evaluand, which is the policy, the program, or whatever, contribute to or adversely impact things relating to both the human and the natural systems. And you will note that we turn the microscope up on the parts of the natural system that are critical or threatened, in the same way as when we're looking for equity, you turn the microscope up on those groups who have been most marginalized, oppressed, or least well served in the human system. So moving to the next slide. I just want to run you through a few quick resources, and then we will open up for questions. So we have the footprint evaluation project, and the work that we've been doing and developing resources is all up on the Better Evaluation website. So you can see the URL there that will take you there. Next slide, we have a thematic page on Better Evaluation that shows some of the resources, including, for example, the footprint key evaluation questions and various other things. We're adding to this all the time. On the next slide, you can also join a community of practice. We have a discussion group of people who are interested in thinking this through that is running through one of the, there's a discussion group you can join as part of footprint evaluation. And then on the next slide, we have a little light reading for you, for those of you who are interested in reading some more on this topic. So Andy has, and there's one piece there for me, but we have quite a few very useful resources that you may find informative as you think about this issue. And then on the next slide, for those of you who are interested in, for example, the typology and the rubrics we're developing and the thinking behind that, there are a few resources there that I've been working on. And then just on the last slide, we have the link once again to the URL for the Better Evaluation. But if you go to Better Evaluation and just type in footprint evaluation, you'll find it there. We are gradually trying to get more resources up, hopefully in different languages. So we hope that you will join the conversation and start to be part of the change. Thank you. So we'll now switch to questions. Comments?
Eu não sei, eu não vi nenhuma questão aqui no chat, ou será que eu perdi alguém? Marcos, conseguiram? Na verdade, eu tenho uma questão que é, suponha que nós, avaliadores brasileiros, queiramos muito incorporar sustentabilidade em todas as nossas avaliações. Na opinião de vocês, o quanto a gente deveria conhecer ou se aprofundar no tema sustentabilidade antes de adotar esse caminho? Muita gente é leiga nesse assunto, então não é uma coisa fácil de imaginar na prática. O que vocês acham?
Great, thank you. Andy, are you able to hear the translation of the questions?
No, I did not.
So down the bottom, there's a little globe button that says interpretation. So if you click, stay where you are right now, but when someone's speaking Portuguese, click that and choose English and you'll be good. Anyway, the question was, how do we get started on this if we don't know much about sustainability? So I think, and this is one of the things that we're really trying to work with Footprint. I mean, obviously, Andy has been living and breathing this and dreaming about sustainability every night for much longer than I have. And so I'm a relative newcomer to this. And so that's part of the footprint evaluation movement, is to say, how can we tap into the expertise and create something practical that even people who are new to this thinking can actually use. So we have these various resources that you can get started with. The other thing to be aware of, it's really important when addressing, you know, both equity and sustainability, we need to bring in multiple different kinds of knowledge, people who hold different sources of knowledge to help us make sense of things. Some of the best people, you can obviously tap into people with environmental science expertise and find stakeholders who can help you with that. but also a really important resource is connecting with the Indigenous people on whatever lands that you are on. These are the people who are the traditional knowledge holders about what this land is all about and how we preserve it for multiple generations. That knowledge is already there. These are the people you're already working with. So this is often a way just to try and bring these people to the table, give more voice to them, and use these different knowledges. Another important thing is including people who we call boundary spanners, who are able to help translate ideas from one discipline through into another and help connect those different knowledges and create them into something that is really going to make sense. So it's definitely possible to start small, draw on different people. It's better to just try and do something imperfect than it is to wait until you have the perfect knowledge and then do it. So I strongly encourage, and I'm sure Andy does as well, jump in, give it a go. We are trying to create resources that are going to help and support people. There's a community of practice, some with different levels of expertise, and they can advise in different ways. So we hope you'll jump in and not be intimidated by this. Thanks for the question.
First of all, it's important not to be too hard on yourself. And second of all, it's important to realize that you probably carry the worldview and mindset. Just as we're recognizing that systemic racism exists and is present in us all, and we're constantly struggling against it, we have to also recognize that systemic destruction of natural systems is something we carry with us. And they both come from the same place. They both come from this concept of dominion. And put it crudely, in its origins, nothing matters but white males from Western Europe and earlier times. And it's the foundation of colonialism, it's the foundation of a lot of the inequity that exists in the world today. So we share the same foundation. So the same struggle for equity is the same struggle for sustainability. And struggling for sustainability is a struggle for equity. So once you start thinking that way, and I guarantee you it's a daily event. I had an event yesterday when I basically went, oh my God, how could I be thinking that way? It was just had to do with the horses. And I wasn't understanding what being a horse is and how my actions were impairing the horse or were mystifying to the horse. Why on earth is he doing that? This is a daily discovery and improvement. And in evaluation, if you join in on this, you're at the vanguard. Evaluation, we've conducted assessments, UN Evaluation Group and the Canadian Evaluation Society have conducted assessments. And natural systems and sustainability is included in less than 4% of evaluations globally and in Canada. And it's less than 4% of what we call the intellectual infrastructure, the publications, the gray literature, conference presentations. So evaluation is very strongly excluding natural systems, and we need to bring sustainability and natural systems into that. So if you're in the vanguard and if you're new to this, then you're really important because you're changing things for the whole evaluation function, for the whole evaluation endeavor. And it's very much a learning journey that we would all benefit if you shared your, joint footprint or found other ways to share this, because all of our discoveries, all of our voyages are really on new space.
Muito bem, muito obrigada pelo estímulo e pelos conselhos. Eu tenho algumas outras perguntas. O Fábio Moraes Gessuas pergunta: como podemos adotar a avaliação da sustentabilidade ambiental de uma empresa de software para além das práticas sustentáveis escritório, como redução de papel, para trabalho remoto, etc.
It's a good example with, fortunately, an example that has some answers. Software uses a lot of electricity for processing, and organizations, for example, DuckDuckGo, which is a search engine, have committed to 100% renewable sources for the energy they use, and to becoming net zero in their use of energy. And they've done this within a fairly tight time frame. I think it's 2025, but I could be wrong on that. So that software can make those, software is the driver of that energy consumption. So that software has the potential to dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Another area is to software. A lot of software is written is sort of expert systems, guidance systems to help you do things. And those expert systems do not currently encompass or are concerned with natural systems. So expert systems in transport should embed greenhouse gas emissions, but also the use of reducing the use of concrete in road construction, things like this. So the software can broaden out and start saying, well, we really need to be net zero and beyond in this. So that software that helps you build a building. We now know how to build buildings with a lot less concrete and steel, which is much more sustainable. We now know that we need to do a lot more recycling and have product designs that allow for recycling, encourage recycling, and allow extraction. For example, flat screens use approximately 50 really scarce resources that cannot be recovered in recycling, given current product design. So that it's like evaluation. A lot of software doesn't consider sustainability, recycling, energy consumption, and it's not a big deal to do it. DuckDuckGo and other enterprises are showing how they can do that.
Marcia, you're on mute.
Desculpa. Obrigada pela resposta. Eu vou seguir na sequência aqui outras perguntas. A Adriana de Queiroz, da RBMA, da rede aqui, é mais uma curiosidade, mas ela quer saber, temos algum representante do Brasil neste exercício na OCDE? Os grandes fundos de investimento estão utilizando avaliações ou apoiando a Footprint Evaluation Initiative?
Jane, do you have an answer on OECD?
Yeah, I don't know, like with this, I mean, we're not centrally involved with the OECD DAC criteria. We're just helping to provide an explanation of how these can be built in. I know that we have quite a diverse range of people that are involved in the discussion group on footprint evaluation. I can't confirm if we have any Brazilians involved yet, but boy, I hope we do soon. And you'll all be joining the conversation. So yeah, sorry, don't have a lot of details for that question.
However, the OECD DAC criteria are used in most development evaluations, of which there are many in Brazil. So you are, in effect, the representatives from Brazil in the sort of mindful, sustainability, thoughtful application of the OECD DAC criteria. And in reality, if you present the OECD DAC criteria as Jane has presented to you, it's very hard for them to argue against it. So I think you should think of yourselves as the representatives. In terms of the project I pointed to in Northeast Brazil is part of a new generation of approaches that really developed, that really approach really serious human problems. The poverty in Northeast Brazil, the dwindling water supply, the loss, I think it's around 250,000 hectares are lost annually to production in that region because of drought. So addressing these really serious human system problems through the lens of, well, what is the real problem? The real problem is there's not enough water. It isn't a problem that we have to use the dwindling supply of water more efficiently. That, of course, is true, but we can't solve the human system problems. We can't really address them unless we have more water. So what we need to do is build local community-based approaches that will use the increasing water that will be provided by the planting and the natural system interventions, that they'll understand how to conserve and use that water, that growing supply of water, more sustainably. And it is just now entering into the phase where it will be evaluated. And the pressure for more projects such as that recognize the coupling of human and natural systems, the pressure to have more projects, future projects, look like that will be enhanced if evaluations under the OECD DAC criteria or Brazilian criteria include sustainability, include natural systems in the evaluations, and address them as an inherent and important part of the intervention. So once again, I pass it to you, but we stand ready and committed and really happy to help you in that in any way that we can.
Ok, próxima aqui é da Martina, que trabalha no Instituto Clima e Sociedade. Ela pergunta: há alguns indicadores relacionados com dados produzidos internacionalmente ou não, que na experiência de vocês têm cumprido a função de incluir critérios de sustentabilidade na avaliação? Deu para entender?
The Independent Evaluation Office of the Global Environment Facility is an excellent example. And they have a very good website. And you'll find that systematically, they now look at both human and natural systems in all of their evaluations. And they developed methods and systems and processes for doing this. However, their evaluations are very large. They're addressing very large issues. And a lot of the evaluations that are undertaken don't have the intellectual capacity, or they're not big enough. They don't have the funding support, and they don't necessarily have the political buy-in that the Jeff, through their work, has obtained. The Jeff Independent Evaluation Office, through their work, has obtained from the board and management at the Global Environment Facility.
So maybe if I could just add to that kind of conversation. I mean, I think like there are indicators out there. There are things that people use that are related to environmental sustainability. And I think one of the things that we've identified that is not being done well is, and I think this is a problem with really the whole of evaluation, not specifically to do with environmental sustainability, is that it's easy to go measure a lot of things. It's more difficult to use that evaluative reasoning to make sense of them and to answer the question, you know, how beneficial or destructive are the following environmental impacts, for example. So you can measure things. One of the things that we wanted to do in developing the typology, which shows that scale from restorative through to destructive, is to have like a clear way of classifying different effects as how good or how bad they are for the environment. So it's one thing to bring in measures and evidence and indicators, but the really important step is to take that evidence, and it can be a mix of indicators, but also qualitative evidence. For example, from the you know, indigenous folks on the land can tell you a lot about how good or bad things are. You use that mix of evidence, but you need to interpret it using a really clear typology so that we're clearly explaining to decision makers, this is how impactful on the environment your decisions are, or this policy is, so that we're being super clear about that, because that's what's then going to inspire people to take action to do something about it. It's very easy to, I don't know, swim through a huge sea of indicators and still feel a little lost. So I think the key is doing that reasoning and that judgment. That's the reason why we're turning to rubrics methodology as a way to guide that reasoning and to help get much clearer conclusions about impact on environmental sustainability.
One of the, I would point to the International Fund for Agricultural Development thematic evaluation of support for smallholder farmer adaptation to climate. And that's where we first applied the typology. And it's one of the early examples of including natural systems systematically throughout an evaluation of what previously would have been just a human system intervention. But your question is good, and we need to, one of the things we'll do immediately in Footprint is compile a bit of a list of evaluations that you might look at for guidance. So we'll commit to doing that within very short order.
Obrigada pela resposta, Jane e Andy. A próxima pergunta é do Wesley Matheus, ele também é diretor da Rede Brasileira. Qual o papel dos estados neste processo? E quais desafios os contextos federalistas, como os observados no Brasil e nos Estados Unidos, impõem a esta agenda?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm based here in the United States, where yeah, we're facing many of the same issues that, you know, as you're facing in Brazil, where you have powerful, particularly commercial interests and political individuals who are trying to block any consideration of environmental sustainability. And a lot of that is about, you know, buying into that colonialist mindset that, you know, the resources are there for humans to use. And if we start to try and use them carefully, that's just holding back economic development, and humans are going to be suffering. So, you know, we know that, like, that's very difficult to argue in the current environment. I think one of the things that, you know, the way that we sort of work around these issues here in the States, where we've got similar things, is, you know, trying to tap into the places that actually are thinking this way. So if the federal government is not really thinking clearly about this, or they don't have enough power or influence, then we work with the states. But quite often it's, I think in a lot of this area, it's quite often not just the states, but also the municipalities, because they are quite often bearing the cost of the cleanup of a lot of environmental damage. You know, everything from, like, you know, waste clothing from the fashion industry going into landfills, to like pollution going into the environment. I mean, these things are quite often, the costs are being paid by at the kind of local municipality, and to some extent the state level, and all of the taxpayers there. So I think, like, that's the place to maybe try and push the system, is to highlight who's bearing the cost of this damage, and raise the consciousness there. So you choose the forum where you're going to be able to get in somehow. So that's what we always do practically as evaluators. I mean, evaluation is a very political activity, and we've got to be smart about it. So this is, and I'm reminded also that this is very similar. Trying to get this on the agenda is the similar journey to trying to get equity on the agenda. You think back 20 years ago, it was very common to have a policy or a program that says, oh, listen, we're just trying to fix the economy, not deal with equity. We don't have to look at that. And now it's just not acceptable to say that. Like, you can't say, oh, we're not looking at equity. Like, you have to, that it's now become standard practice. So we're on the same journey with environmental sustainability. Be very clear, this is not about taking equity off the agenda or sidelining it. They are absolutely inextricably linked. You can't effectively address equity issues without addressing the fact that we are damaging the environment in ways that affect the most vulnerable people the most. And so we've got to get that understanding super clear, and we've got to identify like the places who are feeling the pain, either financially or socially or economically, and tap into that pain and try and get the motivation for people to pay attention to this.
And it's, actually I have good news on this front. But first, gender is obviously important. And the connection, the coupling of human natural systems is very clear with gender, is that currently in much of the world, women are having to travel further and further to fetch water for their household. And that's because of dwindling water supply. And it isn't really progress to have men and women moving together to fetch water from further and further afield from an even smaller water supply. What we really need is water supplies that are usable and fit for human and other species consumption and use. So, whatever we look at, these things are coupled. Jane mentioned municipal government. There's an organization called, or a movement called C40. It's 40 cities that are committed to climate change. Right now, there's about 125 cities, and 4 of them are in Brazil, which is about the largest representation of any country in the C40 movement. And they need evaluation. Those cities will need evaluation to keep them going and help them improve. Right now, South Africa, the Department of Monitoring and Evaluation, which is the presidency, is changing their evaluation guidance to require sustainability and natural systems are integrated and addressed in all evaluations. So they're a country that is sort of in one of the leading countries in monitoring and evaluation in Africa, has taken a stance on sustainability. The executive director of European Environment was a keynote speaker at the European Evaluation Society, and really clearly showed that the European Union is committed to and applying sustainability in evaluation. And his address was published in the recent issue of Evaluation, which I believe is open access. I believe that everyone can access that. If you cannot, then we certainly will provide it. Canada, the central agency in Canada, has directed all new initiatives, programs, projects, everything has to address 3 really fundamental questions on sustainability. That means that all new programs are open to evaluation addressing sustainability in their evaluations, because it is in the central guidance of how all investments by the government of Canada are to function. The United States is a laggard, but in Africa, in Canada, in the European Union, which is a pretty good chunk of the world, we have very strong openings that are welcoming of evaluation to be incorporating sustainability into our work. It's just getting started. They're very slow off the table, but they're off the table, and therefore they're open to us stepping forward with them.
Obrigada. O Tomás Chianca tem aqui 2 perguntas, e acho que vão ser as últimas dessa rodada. E ele fez as perguntas em inglês, então eu vou ler em inglês. Jane and Andy, for smaller evaluations, how to balance the evaluation budget if you have to add 1 or more new sustainability questions in the context of a fixed price project? And the second question is, how do you respond to the argument that asking to include sustainability questions to any evaluation is an imposition, sometimes disrespectful to local people's interests and priorities?
Yeah, so there's been quite a lot of discussion on this. So I guess in response to the first question, like, you know, quite often we're dealing with a quite constrained evaluation budget. So how do we get something in there that somebody didn't want there in the first place? Yeah, it's a difficult challenge. So I think my own personal approach is, I don't know if you know the story of the Trojan horse getting into Rome. So I tend to use whatever Trojan horse, like whatever way I can get these ideas in, even if I have to be a little sneaky about how I do it. But quite often you can build in some sustainability at relatively low cost by maybe it will tag on to some other element of your evaluation, and you can just sort of expand it. I'm just thinking, Thomas, one of the examples we used as a thought experiment for footprint evaluation was the retrospective impact evaluation we did in Ethiopia, looking at school buildings and so forth. And, you know, we were thinking about like, how well will these school buildings last for the children? But we weren't actually thinking about how sustainable is the construction. So it was sustainable in terms of it was lasting when it was built of concrete, but that was very unsustainable from an environmental perspective. So I think we would have been able to slip that into the report without a whole lot of added cost, without doing a huge amount, even if you do it more like a thought experiment to say, okay, we're not going to quantify all of the impact for you, but it's well known that concrete has the following problems, and you could lay that out in the report. So sometimes it's a case of just being able to pick the brains of somebody who knows a couple of things about this. I just call Andy up the road and say, what's going on here? What should we do with this? And he gives us some ideas. But there's some cheap ways to do it. In terms of like trying to get things onto the agenda that people don't want on the agenda, you quite often will get pushback on, particularly people who want to prioritize economic development, for example, and think that we'll worry about the environment later. I think the thing is to really try and get a good understanding that not all of the local people are going to be pushing back against this, and I think quite often it's the case the people who are resisting getting environmental sustainability on the agenda are the people who are least affected by it and most likely to, let's say, benefit from things that are going to destroy the environment. So we need to be looking at their vested interests as well and call them out on that. I think that's part of our job as evaluators, to ask these tough questions. I know we're a little bit short on time, but hopefully Andy can squeeze a few comments in.
I wouldn't add much, just that I have been doing this for quite a while, as Jane says, and it's really striking to me how much easier it is to raise these questions and incorporate them now than it was even 2 years ago. And the resistance has shifted so that management reviews of evaluation designs are quite comfortable with including sustainability and natural resource effects. Their pushback has shifted to, once you present the results, then it doesn't really support their existing program. So it's now downstream. We've already done the evaluation. We're talking about how they're going to use the evaluation. It just isn't nearly as difficult. And one of the things that is really important is local communities and indigenous peoples and citizen science. There is a lot of knowledge that is there that is not all that difficult to engage in the evaluation, and which we should be doing because they're the people that are impacted by the interventions. So that if we can bring those voices forward to the evaluation design and development of the evaluation approach, it really does broaden the theory of change and the concept of the intervention to include that. And we all know that if those people, if their voices are at the table, then they have an authority and a power. So those are allies in bringing in this agenda to always address equity and sustainability in all evaluations.